Burr, if you want to introduce yourself, and when I'm actually, let me mute everybody here. Unmute you. All right.
Hello, everyone.
Go ahead, Burr.
Hello, everyone. I'm Burr Stewart, and I'm the owner of a model railroad in Seattle, Washington, which models the Burrlington Northern in roughly 1973. I gave a presentation to this august group just before we started recording, so you can't see it anymore, but maybe I can come back and do the entire layout sometime. Today, I'm just going to focus the entire presentation on the jet job, so-called. And we have Bob Stafford in the room, who is one of the people I've learned a lot from, who was a railroader in this area, and he can help answer questions as well as anyone else who joins us with expertise. I'm going to share my PowerPoint presentation now and see what happens. Can you see that full screen?
Yep, looks good.
I'm going to cover the prototype, why I got interested in it, the model that I run, and the operation itself. And I'll show you a video of the operation so you can see it happening. To start with, Boeing has what was at least the largest amount of square footage under one roof in the world in this huge 747 factory in Everett, Washington, which this is a aerial view of. And if you can see my mouse, there's a railroad, Burrlington Northern, used to be Great Northern branch line that comes up from the main line here. Actually, the main line's down here by the water. And it comes up a 5% grade up to the plant, and you can see some facilities there. This is a close-up of the unloading area. Now, in the era that I model, which is 1973, there was no turntable, and this meant that they had to use the turntables in Everett to get the cars oriented right so they could shove the indoor boxcars in facing the right way so the crew could unload the cars, which just adds another really interesting twist. I got inspired to do this from a number of places, but this is Al Frash's old, very extensive operating layout on Whidbey Island a few years ago, and he built a model of the Boeing factory. You can see it doesn't have quite as many tracks as the prototype, but this was a lot of fun job to switch on his N-scale layout. He moved to Tucson a couple of years ago, tore down this absolutely gorgeous layout, and Bob Stafford, who I mentioned is on the call, took it over and turned it into a module which he displays at our annual Science Center show, where we try to get as many young people interested in model railroading as possible. You can see here the 3 skybox cars going into the plant full of aircraft parts coming from various places in the world. And that's my friend Dave Enger sitting in for Bob temporarily. So to just cover the geography and why this is kind of interesting, here we are in the northwest corner of the country, but Wichita, Kansas, it has Boeing Wichita, and there's a number of aerospace manufacturers down in Los Angeles, all of who supplied parts for the Boeing airplanes. This is a close-up just of the Washington State area, that same map, and where the Boeing plant is located is right near Everett, which is the terminus of the old Great Northern main line all the way to Minneapolis. And it's also, of course, on the north-south line from Vancouver, British Columbia to Portland. Now, if that's too complicated a map to take in, I made a simplified version of what I'm trying to accomplish in my layout. This is just the modeled portions. And so I run from Bellingham in the north down to South Seattle in the south, And then my whole layout is based on the idea that at delta Y, the trains then headed east. So my basic philosophy as a model railroader is why have only one main line when you could have three? Because when we start operating this thing, we got trains going north, we have trains going east, we have trains going south. I didn't even mention the car barge which went over to the Olympic Peninsula over here. You can see it on here. And I have a model of that as well. So we actually go 4 directions, and complexity is my middle name. Anyway, getting back to the subject here, specifically on the jet job, the Boeing Everett plant is located here with that brief main line, or that branch line, the 5% grade. There's also the Boeing Renton plant that manufactures the 737s, which of course is also a very large and important industrial complex in the region. And there is a line that goes out to Renton as well. This job by the railroaders is called the jet job, and the Renton service is called the Renton Rocket. And if you're familiar with the Friends of the Burrlington Northern Railroad, FOBNR, they had an excellent article a couple of years ago about the operation of the Renton Rocket. And I'm not going to talk about that anymore because today's focus is all on the jet job. But you can see with my layout, it's a tremendous amount of fun. And I know some of you have already been here operating, but to try to keep track of what cars go to what industry along this huge area, and in particular the aircraft parts cars, which ones go to Everett and which ones go to Renton. And of course, that's the same challenge that the real railroad had. Now, as far as the origins and destinations, I mentioned that Boeing Wichita manufactured a lot of parts, and I can't remember the name of the company that took that over. Boeing divested it, and that's the company that today ships fuselages. But in 1973, they weren't shipping fuselages, but they were shipping a lot of parts from that group. Then McDonnell Douglas, or some precursor to McDonnell Douglas, was shipping parts up from the Los Angeles area that would go by the Santa Fe, and the Hawker Siddeley in Canada was also shipping parts to Boeing Everett. And when the airplanes were made largely out of aluminum, the scrap would then be shipped to be recycled at Alcoa, Tennessee, which was a huge aluminum complex. And there was also an Alcoa plant up here in Ferndale, which is north of Bellingham. There was a big plant here, and eventually I'll find out if Boeing ever sent any scrap up there. And of course, the truth is that's so close they probably would have trucked it. But we don't deal with the truth when we're model railroads. We deal with what makes a really fun model railroad. So anyway, we got the parts coming into the plant, and then we have scrap going out of the plant, and that's enough to really add some complexity. This is an aerial photograph or map that was printed in Trains magazine a couple of years ago. I just wanted to clarify the complexity and the nature of the track work. There's a large yard called Delta Yard in Everett, and a smaller industrial yard called Bayside on the west side of town, where there was a large toilet paper factory, Scott Paper Company, and they also staged the movements to the jet job here in the Bayside Yard. Of course, I've already mentioned the Boeing plant was down. This is about 6 miles from Bayside Yard to the Boeing plant, and there was a trailing point spur that came off here. So the trains would come down locomotive first and then back up caboose first, because the 5% grade here required that for safety that they have the locomotive at the bottom of the train. And the key point here is, while a lot of the trains were handled and switched in Delta, in 1973 they made up the jet job in Bayside, and then they took it here. And I just want to mention it was a switch job. It was not a local. And that means they were just using a local Bayside switch crew to run this train, even though it probably took most of the day to get up here, switch the plant, and come back to the yard. This is a photograph of one of 3 GP9s that were retrofitted with special super duper brakes. And I don't know anything about this other than that, because it's not externally obvious, but there are only 3 locomotives that would be prototypical to run up to the plant at that time: 17, 97, 98, and 99. And I thought, well, that's cool. I've got a Athearn Genesis Jeep 9 labeled 1742. Why don't I just change out those 2 numbers and I'll have 1799. So it was one of my first exercises in locomotive renumbering, which, as you can see, was only partly completed in this particular photograph. But anyway, it was very important to me to run locomotive 1799 on this particular switch job. Unfortunately, of course, that was one of the early Tsunami sound decoders, and now that they're Tsunami 2s, I need to re-decoder this engine, as well as well, I have weathered it since this picture was taken. Now, there was also a company called LBF 20 or 30 years ago manufactured in HO scale and N scale a number of these skybox cars, is what they called them. They were high height cars for wing and tail sections that could be then put together in the plant. And there were a lot of other types of cars that you could run on this branch. I pick on Illinois Central because I just love that paint scheme from the 70s, but there was clearly traffic coming from the Midwestern railroads. This is an empty gondola, a loaded gondola of aluminum chips. I think at some point it was too risky to ship valuable aluminum scrap in an open gondola where it could be stolen. So I don't really know anything about when they started handling all the scrap movements in boxcars, but that's a subject maybe we can talk about later. And of course, it's an excuse to run Canadian cars down from Hawker Siddeley. And I haven't found out anything about this yet, but they must have shipped at least some liquid materials in for the cleaning and manufacture of the parts, and so there's clearly a bunch of traffic, different types of cars that could be run on this branch. And of course, I already had the Bayside yard ready for action, and this picture shows a particular run of the jet job with a Great Northern caboose at the end, some scrap. This clearly has just arrived from the plant, and a little bromide car just for the heck of it, and 3 of these skybox cars. So the yard was ready. I just needed to figure out how to model the plant, and the trailing point lead on the prototype looks like this. You head from Everett south towards Seattle, then you have to back up into the plant, and you can see it just sort of backs into the hills. And being an HO scale and being a track nut, I have really no room for this thing. But it occurred to me one day that I did have a cutoff track burrowing into a fictitious tunnel for my continuous run connection for open houses and things. And it occurred to me that that would be a great place to just stage a train and call that the jet job. So that's what we did. And you can see the box here I have at the Boeing Payne Field. These are the car cards, and we're all ready to go. Here's a map of the layout itself, and this is what I'm talking about, where I have a little hidden connection between the south staging yard and the main line that runs through here. It's about 7 feet long, which is plenty long enough to stage a jet job of up to something like 8 or 9 cars, which is plenty long enough for that run. And to simplify, so you don't have to keep studying this complex out of control track plan, this is the schematic of the layout, and I just wanted to show you the color scheme I use for the car cards. The bluer you get, the colder it is, so to the north. The redder, the warmer it is towards the south. And then I needed a color for going east, and I realized that the headquarters of the Burrlington Northern was in Minneapolis at this time, and purple is the color of royalty historically, so that's how I remember that purple is east. So the the entire layout is based on the Inner Bay Yard in Seattle, so I have that be white, and then Everett area gets green as their color. Um, Someone maybe on this call wrote an excellent article in the Dispatcher's Office, which is the magazine of the OPSIG, a couple of years ago, showing an exhibit that looks like this. Oh, I just back up for a second. This is the area the jet job goes. It simply goes from Bayside Yard, where we collect all the cars, down to the spur and in there and back. Except we run it the other way around. I'll get to that. But back to this exhibit. I found this really helpful to make the layout schematic even more simpler for operators. So we could just put a black mark in here and say, you are now at Bayside Yard, and all of the red and yellow and white cars go to the right, and all of the blue or purple cars go to the left. And this was just a way to help the operators, because this is a very complex layout. And so to illustrate how much fun this is, cars come from the east, they're the purple destinations, into the Delta Yard. They come from the south into Bayside, and from the north they come into Bayside. So the jet job is simply to take all of the cars from Bayside that need to go to the Boeing Spur in Mukilteo. But of course, the eastern cars aren't at Bayside, so we also have to run a transfer job between the Delta Yard and the Bayside Yard. So other than that, I mean, what's complicated about simply going from one city to the next and shoving in backwards? But that's where we are. I just wanted everyone to know that I pay attention to Tony Keister, and he said you could do track planning with forks, so I tried it. This is a version of my layout diagram, the entire thing done with forks, and I'm just doing this to give you a break and make a joke. But on my full layout tour, I can go into how I built the layout in stages, and the forks just got more and more complicated. So now we're going to actually talk about operating the jet job, and then I'll show you a quick video of the jet job in operation. Here's a typical jet job. You can see, of course, we have to have number 1799 on the job, and what's doing here is step one, which is pulling out of the Boeing Spur with the loco pulling it. Then the next thing is to run caboose forward to Bayside. Now, I talked to Ray Wheeler about this, who used to work for the railroad at this time, and he said that they could have run around the train and gone engine first, but they basically were too lazy. It was a switch crew, and they wanted to get home quickly, so they just pulled out and ran caboose first. All they had to do was have a whistle in the caboose, and that would work. So that's kind of a fun thing to do on a model railroad, to run a legitimate train caboose first. So when you get to Bayside, you exchange your cars with the yardmaster, who's hopefully ready for you. Run back here to Mukilteo engine first. You can see this is a double track main line here, so when you come southbound, you're on the right-hand track. So there's a crossover up here, which you'll see us use to get over to the main track. Of course, that requires dispatcher clearance and makes the job more interesting. And then eventually you run up to and clear this Boeing Spur entrance and back into the spur and get out of the way, and then release the main line. And of course, place the car cards in the box. Now, some of the management considerations, this is a view of the Bayside Yard from a different angle with some more of those skybox cars. We generally run this job only after a full cycle of through trains have dropped their cars, because otherwise there'd be nothing to take to the plant. So, you know, if it's an 8-hour operating session, we don't run this until, you know, after a few hours have gone by. As I mentioned, if needed, we run a transfer between the Delta and Bayside yards for the eastern cars, because the east-bound cars trains don't go through Bayside Yard. Sometimes the prototype and we would run a Skybox special to expedite certain loads. And I saw a picture of this the other day with an SD-45 hauling 3 Skybox cars, which is almost exactly the same train that I made a movie about just a couple of weeks ago. It's on my YouTube channel called the Skybox Special. And so I think in the future we may do that more often. If we don't have enough Skybox cars ready, we'll just run them in from one of the staging areas. The other fascinating thing about this, in my era, which was before that turntable, I think I mentioned this before, but you need to shove the end door box cars in with the door first so that they can unload it onto their loading dock. So we happen to have a turntable in Bayside and an engine facility. So the Bayside Yardmaster, if they had any time, which some of you have worked that job and know that you don't have any time running that job, but if you had any time, you could take the indoor cars that are facing the wrong way and rotate them. I haven't seen this done yet, but I just recently put an indoor box car on the layout for this purpose. So hopefully one of you will be scrambling to get that done one of these days. Now, all of that management work done before we've even run the jet job. Now, at this point, there's enough set up and facing the right direction that the Bayside Yardmaster can call a crew. And generally, the prototype would then start the job here in Bayside, go to the plant, switch the plant, and come back. We do it the opposite way because I like to have an engine in the cut in the staging yard so that I can pull that cut out easily if I want to do continuous running in between op sessions. It's kind of a lame excuse. I mean, we might change this to doing it correctly. And of course, it's a lot of fun to have a caboose with whistle sound, and I think we're going to demonstrate that next. So at this point, I'm going to stop sharing my slideshow, and I'm going to start sharing with optimizing for video.
Make sure you turn your camera off.
Oh yeah, turn my camera off, and we will pick the QuickTime player. What happened there? Are you seeing it?
Yep, looks good. Go ahead and
great.
play it.
So this is a complete video of the operation of the jet job, and it's about, well, 17 minutes long. So I'm going to speed it up so we don't have to sit here for 17 minutes, and we'll just stop it for the fun parts. So first of all, of course, you're coming out and you need to have clearance from the dispatcher before you can enter this is the northbound main that he's entering. By the way, this is Todd Von Stoop operating this train, who some of you may know from the Nebraska area where he used to live in Omaha. And he's an experienced operator who moved here a couple of years ago. And we couldn't be happier about that. So anyway, I'm going to go up to 10 times and let you see the obvious, which is you pull onto the main and then you have the fun of, I think I just missed the horn beep, but there's a whistle in this caboose. The reason it's not a Great Northern caboose is because this is the only caboose I have with a sound car in it so far, but we'll fix that over time. And you might hear a clickety-clack. No, that was before. So we'll go ahead and speed up. We come around to a grade crossing in Mukilteo. And that's kind of fun because the whistle needs to blow for the grade crossing, which I think is about to happen. Sounds like we have an axle. There it is. What kind of a Chevy is that? Like a 57?
could be.
Yeah, something like that. So having gone through Mukilteo, now we're heading along what's called the Low Line, which is a section of track that went to the Bayside Yard. I think I can speed it up again. You can see some box cars here in the consist as well as the skybox cars. And of course our trusty 1799. So we'll speed it up again. We go across the Squid Bridge, named for that famous scary looking squid underneath it. And we pull into Bayside Yard, where we carry out a bunch of switching, but we can't do it too aggressively because that was the Pacific Zip that just went flying by. Pacific Zip was the Burrlington Northern's first attempt at a expedited intermodal train back in the early 70s. So we always enjoy running that. We had a little shenanigans with the caboose here because we had to keep it clear of the main because we had another train coming by. This is the famous plutonium train, which we made up of a bunch of Penn Central cars. And that's another subject. I'm trying to stay focused on the jet job here and not get sidetracked, so to speak. So
And
clearly,
for the YouTube link I threw in the chat, is that the full version of this video?
no, you mean the one called the Special, Skybox Special?
Yeah.
Yeah, no, it's a precursor to this.
Okay.
I haven't published this one yet, but it'll be up in a couple of days. I just need to put some titles in it.
Well, if you go throw Burr a subscribe on YouTube, then you'll see the new one when he puts it up, everybody.
Yeah. So I'm going to speed this up again because obviously what we have to do is drop our consist here and then pick up the new consist on a different track. And you all know how to do that, so I'll just let you see this at 10 times speed. Now he's going for the new consist. So these are the cars that need to be brought up to the Boeing plant. And I can't tell you, well, I can tell you how happy the yardmaster at Bayside is to get rid of these cars because, as you know, your main goal as a yardmaster is to get stuff out of your yard. So he's getting 3 of these nice skybox cars out of there. I have to give Todd credit for being able to touch up to that caboose without coupling onto the SP locomotive there. So here we go. We got our train all set, and we're heading back to Mukilteo.
So did anybody buy those old LBF molds for those cars that you're aware of?
I don't know, but that's a great question. Because right now they're going for $90 a piece on eBay.
I only wonder if you could do a
paid like
free print of it.
Now this is an interesting thing here. Well, we're coming through the grade crossing again, only this time we got the regular engine sound instead of that weird caboose whistle. And then the other thing that Todd is professionally demonstrating is that we're going to stop at the crossover and flip those switches, although at some point they would have probably been dispatcher controlled switches, but I'm not sure what that point is. So on this railroad we let the crew stop and flip the crossover. So you see here he's on the wrong track. He needs to be on the right hand side. So he comes to a stop and the brakeman gets out, and I don't know what they have to do, but in this case all Todd had to do was flip a toggle. And that's what the jet job looks like. Of course, I don't have the audio for him getting permission from the dispatcher to block both main lines like this, but that's what happened. See how wiggly those cars are? They have really poor trucks. The detail is excellent in the cabs, but I'm going to at some point replace the trucks on those things because they really are not high quality. And of course, there's our gaping tunnel representing the uh, trailing point curve up to the 5% grade. You could get into an interesting argument about whether the conductor and the train, whoever was running this train from the caboose, would they blow twice for a backwards movement like this, or would this be considered a forward movement and they should only blow once? Or I'm sorry, 3 times. Anyway, that's what our Q&A is for. We can discuss these things. There it goes. Got a crewman waving bye-bye. We go into the tunnel, and then all we have to do is shut down the rotating beacon and the headlight, and we're done. And I just have a couple more slides to show you, and then I'll be done. There we go. Headlight off. Todd has got to put his car cards back in the waybill box. I wanted to demonstrate that, just to be a proper OPSIG member. Okay, now we're going to stop sharing, go back to the PowerPoint, and see what happens. Huh. Interesting. Are you seeing that now?
I mean, I saw your desktop briefly, but now I see
Yes.
pause for brief video again.
Okay, great. That means we're back in business. Can you see the airplane fuselage?
Yep.
Okay. So now the only problem is, what about these fuselages? I'm not an expert in any of this, but I've been trying to find out, and I believe these full fuselage movements from Boeing Wichita started after 1973. But at some point, I'm going to confirm this. But even if it turns out to be true, I still don't know if I can resist trying to make a model of these and running them on the jet job, because it seems like such a thing. As I mentioned before, the fuselages weren't going to Everett anyway. It would be the Renton rocket. But I have noticed at swap meets that people are starting to sell 3D printed versions of these fuselages of various types of Boeing airplanes. So this is a fun aspect. As I mentioned, they went to the Renton rocket, and that's a different presentation, even though it is obviously a Boeing thing. And there's a guy named Andrew Klomka who has just recently published some books on this whole business of airplane movements, which is a fascinating thing, and I've just ordered them. So you can take bets on how long it'll take me before before you can run a fuselage around on my layout. Anyway, in conclusion, fun to run locals can be switch jobs for major industries as well as the traditional types of locals. And of course, if any of you have operated on Seth Newman's layout, he has a fine example of that with his huge auto plant, which is, I believe, a switch job just similar to this, except that there's somewhere to go other than a hole in the wall. There are a lot of trade-offs, obviously, between prototype fidelity and model constraints in both the design, like here where I have no room for the plant, and the operations where I'm running it opposite to the way the prototype ran it, although, like I say, we might change that. Many thanks to Ray Wheeler, Al Frash, and Bob Stafford for teaching me about this interesting job. And there's a lot more information with Friends of the Burlington Northern Railroad and the GN Railway Historical Society than I've provided. I'm just a modeler, not a historical expert. And as Eric mentioned, I will have upcoming YouTube video on this job on the website. On the YouTube channel. And this is the link to the YouTube channel. And I just wanted to point out that in my closing overview of the layout, that there are 3 skybox cars right there in the middle of being prepared to be handled by the jet job. So with that, I turn it over to you, Eric.
That's great, Burr. Thank you very much. Let's see. John Hansky's asking, did these cars go down the Siskiyou line on their way south?
I don't know the answer to that. The Siskiyou line would have been the SP line, right?
I think so.
I think so. And
hold on a
and
second.
these
John,
these
if you want to unmute yourself and follow up.
I do know that some of the cars were handled in Santa Fe boxcars, and those would have probably gone over down the inside gateway rather than going down the Siskiyou line, because Santa Fe and Southern Pacific would have been competing with each other. And Burlington Northern would have gotten more of the revenue if they had kept it over on the inside gateway.
It looks like the chat is saying no on the Siskiyou line, over on the main Cascade line. So.
Yeah, that makes sense to me.
Yeah, because I was going to say those cars going down the Siskiyou would be, it's a pretty winding railroad.
Yeah.
So.
Tight tunnel clearances too.
Yeah.
Right.
So Burr, on the 737 parts, they started after 2000 shipping the full body sections from Wichita. Prior to that, they did ship partial body sections, or a body section rather than the full fuselage.
Yeah, they were the forward section and the aft section. They were shipped in 2 cars. And they did ship a 737 full length up to Everett one time for what they call a static and fatigue test up there. So Burr, you'll see that that's in that volume 4 of my book. There's pictures of it going up that spur. So.
Oh, Andrew, are you the Andrew in the book in the pictures there?
Yes, Burr invited me last night, so I hope you don't mind. So.
No, we're happy to have you.
So
Delighted.
I just want to make a couple other corrections. There were no wing sections shipped up to Everett, because for the 747, all those wings were manufactured in Everett, other than, like, for example, spars or wing skins. Those were manufactured down in Auburn, and then they were trucked up on those special trucks up to Everett. And then nothing from McDonnell Douglas was manufactured for the 747. If anything came out of California, it came out of the Northrop Corporation, where they manufactured large portions of the fuselages, and they required 9 cars to actually move their pieces from down in Southern California up to Everett.
And were those skybox cars, or were there?
Yes.
Or were they? Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, skybox. You'll see. There's a whole bunch of pictures in volume 4 that I have in there, Burr. It's got a whole collection, and then in the ORERs that I printed, I have all the flat cars with the skyboxes on there and stuff like that. So just to let you know, so for a typical 747, a total of 18 cars would be required to bring in a shipment for a whole airplane. And at that time, the furthest one would be coming out of Farmingdale, New York. And there was also one car coming out of Arizona, the Phoenix area, where the Goodyear Aerospace Company was manufacturing the center section for that 747. That's quite an interesting picture structure there. So
Yep. This is really your book is really going to take my model of this jet job to a whole nother level.
If you want to go that far, yeah.
Yeah.
And then, by the way, real quick, there's a little spur that comes off of Mukilteo now, off to the bay there, where they unload. I know you don't have it in 73, but there's a little spur off there in which they get the parts from the Japanese manufacturers that come in there, and they bring it up that spur. So, but they're not
Yeah.
skyboxes.
Yeah. And you could see that on Al Frash's layout. He ran those big those special extra wide containers up from the port of Mukilteo up to the plant.
Yeah.
Yeah, he had
Where-
that in his model.
Where did the wheels and tires come in from? Did they come in on flat cars or
They came on trucks.
on trucks?
Yeah.
Yeah, not on my railroad. They're coming in on a gondola cars or flat cars. Yeah, that's one thing I love about being a model railroader is you can do what you want to do, right?
Exactly.
The heck with the trucks.
So there's plenty of clips of this, but the fact from 2018 that's got both skyboxes.
Yeah, you see that? You see that car right there?
Yeah.
Okay, you see that one? That's actually a section for the 767. That's manufactured currently in Florida right now. And those two ends, slide on rails on that flat car. It's like a deep well flat car. And that's the center section for the 767 airplane, which is now
6.7 or 8.7?
6.7. There
Okay.
are no 787 parts shipped by rail to Everett. Everything
Okay.
comes in on that modified 747 cargo airplane. Okay.
And look at
Those are 777 parts. You can buy those cars now, by the way. So
yeah.
So there's one of the fuselage with the I don't know if they still call that like an icebreaker. The
yeah, brush guard is what we refer to.
brush
that.
guard.
Yeah.
The company in Wichita is now called Spirit Aero Systems.
Yes.
Yes.
Threw a
Right.
link out in the chat with you can kind of, if you zoom in with Google Maps, you can see a bunch of the skyboxes in various places. The one funny thing about these things here is, well, there's a prototype for everything. And so that's an expensive derailment right there.
Oh, yes.
2014 in Montana, some guys were rafting and they caught this video of the, sort of the aftermath. I mean, they weren't there for the derailment, but that's kind of that's more than a little more expensive than a train full of grain,
They scrapped all of those too, by the way.
Do I know?
They scrapped them. They could not rebuild them or repair them.
No, I would expect that would probably cause some concern about using
Yeah.
a little bit of water damage. That'd be fine. It'll buff out.
Yeah. That was a painful day. All right.
Now it was looks like 2014 from that video. But yeah, if anybody's interested, if you watch the I think it's the Railfan or the virtual Railfan cam that's at Skycomish, you can see the Boeing, the 737s coming through there pretty regularly. That's good.
Yeah, and then you'll just see 47s until next year when they end the line. So you won't see any more of those skyboxes other than for 777 and for the 767 parts.
Yeah, it's sad. I mean, I've been, in addition to the live rail cams, there's also some live, there's a guy who has a live cam at O'Hare, and Lufthansa is still flying 747s for passenger service. So when one of those beasts come in, those are such nice planes.
Yeah.
Hey, Burr, can I interrupt you a little bit?
Sure,
Yeah,
go ahead,
please.
bro.
Okay, the We got Bob Stafford as train master for Boeing Hill. And I come out here from the Amarillo Division and to Everett within 2001. And we had a 9 a.m. conference call every morning, 7 days a week with the Boeing traffic department. And we would track the location of all the Boeing cars on that and when they were expected in the Boeing. On the railroad, we never referred to a Boeing car as a skybox. Nobody did. Okay? All the Boeing cars are called Boeing tool cars. And actually, this is informative because I never knew what was in them. I didn't care, really. Okay? It wasn't important. It was just to get the box cars, well, the Boeing tool cars there on time. And then, when I come out here in 2001, Boeing was getting cars off the SP. They came up through Portland. And then we got some cars down from Canada. I think they come off the Canadian National, if I remember right. And of course, we got the cars from the East. And the fuselage cars is what we call them, was fuselage cars. They also come in from the East. And we have what we called it the jet train. The jet train come out of Wichita, Kansas. They're in one or two of them a week most of the time. Most of the time, I think it was two. And the jet train set the fuselages out at Snohomish, Washington. Because at that time, the fuselages could not go between Renton and the main line connection down there at South Seattle, because there was a bridge that they would not fit through. And then the local would come up, the jet job would go, the Renton Rocket would come up and get the fuselage cars and other cars for Boeing from the west leg of the Y at Snohomish. And also, when I come out here, we set all the cars for Boeing out at what we call milepost 31, which was between Everett and Mukilteo. There was two tracks that were 1,300 foot long, and we used one track for inbound Boeing cars and one track for outbound Boeing cars. And the main line trains would set their Boeing cars out there. The Boeing job would operate out of Bayside, like Burr said. And the Port of Everett, at that time, Boeing was getting their containers in from Asia. And to this day, they still come in from Asia. They come down to Tacoma, remember right? And they were loaded on barges at Tacoma, and then they were moved to the Port of Everett. And the Port of Everett unloaded the Boeing containers and then put them on the Boeing flat cars, is what we always refer to them as. There were some modified flat cars, and the rest of them were all intermodal cars assigned to Boeing. So the Boeing job would pick up the Boeing cars off of the dock at Everett and take them down to Mukilteo and shove them up the hill. And then there's around, or when they built that dock at Mukilteo, it was around maybe 2012, something, 2010, 2012.
Yeah.
So when the dock was built at Mukilteo, then the Boeing job didn't have to run out of Everett anymore. They could just gather cars up here locally from Mukilteo or the milepost. And what happened was when the sound transit upgrades were done, a little additional track capacity was built into Mukilteo that allowed for setting out the Boeing cars at Buck.
Yeah, so that really smoothed things out.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And then the Boeing job has Friday and Saturdays off, so it runs Sunday through Thursday. And so on Sundays, it originates out of Delta Yard from the engine terminal there. They run the power out to Mukilteo. Depends who's working it, whether they take the caboose into Delta or not. But then they, I think most times they caboose in. I've been retired for 10 years now, so things have changed a little bit. But they run out then and do the work and shove up the hill. The hill's at 5.5%. And when you come back down the hill, there's a automatic derail towards the bottom of the hill. The signal department has sensors on that leading up to the derail that track the speed of the train. And if the train's doing over 7 miles an hour coming down the hill, the derail is set to derail the train. Because if they're doing 7 miles an hour, they will not get stopped at the bottom of the hill, and they will go out onto the mainline track. And the locomotives for the Boeing Hill, the way they're modified is they have extended range dynamic brakes. The GN had those 3 Jeeps they used. On the BN, we had 4 GP 39s, I guess you call them, the modified ones. The 2076, the 2080, the 2081, and the 2361, if I remember right, with the 4 Boeing units. Oh, and the other modification made to the Boeing units was in the sumps. On a conventional locomotive, if it goes up the hill, the size of the sumps are not high enough. And
for the angle on the 5% grade.
Yeah, so all the water and oil and everything would come running out of them and out onto the footboards and out the end of the engine.
Yeah.
So they have extended sumps on them.
So you said the GP 39s they ran were 2076, 2080, 2081, and 2361.
Right. Yeah, if I remember right, they were the numbers.
You know, an interesting takeaway from what you've just been describing to me is, we're all very familiar with the idea of a turnover report, but when somebody takes over a yard from someone else, there's a turnover report saying which track is being used for which purpose. And it just struck me that you could do this with any large industry on your layout, to have at the beginning of an operating session the equivalent of that little daily phone call with the Boeing company traffic management department. You could basically have a little report saying, here's where all the Boeing cars are on the layout right now, and it's up to the incoming management team to decide, do they need to run a special, do they need to do anything special in order to expedite those moves to the Boeing plant. And I never thought about doing that, but it would be possible for me to just provide, when the operating session starts, to say, here's where all the Boeing cars are all over the layout. You figure out whether you need to do anything about it, or we're going to be fine, as is. And you could do that with any big company. I don't know if any of you have thought about that before, but it's just a variation on a yardmaster turnover report.
Another thing that the Boeing company does is, back in the early days when it was a switch job, the switch jobs at times could get diverted and not get down to Boeing in a timely manner. Boeing wants to consistently have you down there. So this had already started when I went to Everett here from Amarillo. Was the Boeing company paid a premium to the railroad, a monthly fee for a dedicated job, at which time it then became a road switcher. And the road switcher went down and did the Boeing job, and they could only exclusively do Boeing work and nothing else because of what the fee that Boeing pays the railroad for that dedicated service. And another modeling detail is between Everett and Mukilteo, once those 22-foot wide containers started moving on the railroad, all of the signals had to be set back farther from the main line to clear the containers. And any switch stands also had to be lowered to clear the containers. So anyways, that's what I can think of off the top of my head. That's for the more modern day operations of the containers. When I come out here, there was only the Boeing tool cars and the Boeing container cars were going up and down the hill. We never had any box cars or any other thing. That was all being trucked in and out of the factory.
Great.
Thank you, Bob and Andrew, thanks for the help on this.
Yeah, I appreciate everybody's all the information from everybody who's obviously had a lot more experience, hands-on experience. So that's great. I'm a plane dork. I flew everything Boeing had for back when I was flying back in the 90s. Big fan of those. So it's kind of cool to see them on the trains. All right. Well, Burr, thanks so much for presenting. We appreciate it. Make sure if anybody's interested, the links in the chat for Burr's channel, as well as if you go find Wichita, you can take a look at the map there and see some of the skybox cars out there. With that, I'm going to turn off the recording.
Boeing